Hello from Blue Willow Bookshop in Houston, Texas. I am Kathy Berner, and I'm the event coordinator here at the shop. We are honored to host this virtual event celebrating our dear friend James Ponti's new book, City of the Dead, the fourth in the City Spies series, which releases tomorrow. James will be in conversation with another great friend of the shop, Kelly Yang, author of many books for young readers. Her new book, Finally Seen, releases at the end of this month. Please join me in welcoming these amazing authors to the screen.
Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
friends. I'm so glad to see you. Congratulations to both of you on the work that's coming out this month.
Thank you so much.
Thank
So,
you.
why don't you hold up each other's books so everybody
Yes,
can get a good visual?
Finally Seen.
And
It looks amazing. I just finished writing City Spies 5 3 days ago. And so this is my treat as I started reading this, and when I go on tour this week I get to read it. So I've only started it, but I'm already in love with it. Shocked. Who would have thought? Right? Another great
Aw.
Kelly Yang book. Yeah, so very excited. So I just want to thank Kelly for being here, and that means so much to me, and I really appreciate it. And and as Kathy mentioned, anything to do with the independent bookstores are such a vital part of what it is that we do and the books that we have. And so this marks my 10th book coming out on Tuesday. And my very first book, like, nobody saw, nobody paid attention to. And the first glimmer of hope it got was from Blue Willow Bookshop. Someone there found it and like put a shelf talker under it and started building a little following, and they asked me to do a thing, and then it made it onto the Blue Bonnet list. And I feel like the origin story of any of my books has to include Blue Willow. So the fact that I got to do this with them, and then I get to do this with Kelly, this is a very exciting, fun day for me.
Oh, this is so cool. I mean, I'm so honored to be here because I'm a huge fan of your books. I have so many questions for you, but since you brought up origin stories, I love origin stories.
Okay, I'm going to let you two talk.
Okay.
I'm leaving. Bye.
Bye.
I would love to hear from you, and I'm sure everybody else in the audience would love to hear. You've had this long career as a television writer, and then now, you've been doing these amazing children's books. So what is the origin story there? What made you want to pivot and start writing novels for kids?
Well, I love writing from a very young age. I was a terrible reader. I was really slow. I still am pretty slow. Um, Compared to my friends. We have Kelly and I don't know each other, but we have a ton of mutual friends. And a lot of our friends, like the Stuart Gibbs of the world, Stuart said, "Oh, I love your book. I just finished it." I'm like, "I just sent it to you like the other day. It would take me like months to read it." So I struggled reading growing up, but I knew I wanted to be a writer. And so I went to college and majored in screenwriting. And I never was a reader. I never was a reader. And my senior year of college, I went on a blind date with this girl, and the whole thing about a blind date is you hope you get a second date. And so I'm very honest, but about 30 minutes into the date, she mentioned to me that she loved to read. And I thought it would doom my chances for another date if I said, "Well, I'm really bad at it, so I just gave up trying in elementary school." And so I lied, which I never do. And I lied and said, "Oh, I love to read too. I really love to read." And that was fine, except we've been married for 35 years now, and I couldn't admit that I lied when we met. So I started carrying around books when we would go on dates or when we'd hang out or we'd do whatever. And then I found out that, oh, you're kind of slow at it, but you really like it. And then I had this great advantage when my son, I was writing for TV, I was writing for Nickelodeon, and I was writing from home most of the time. And my son went to school 2 blocks away, and so I volunteered a lot because I could write the script at night, and I could do whatever. My schedule was flexible, and I would hang out in the school library as a volunteer. And I thought, wow, I don't know if I just didn't look hard enough, or if there's been like this growth in like different kinds of books. But there were so many books that I liked that I started getting the idea that maybe I could do it. And so it was something I toyed with for years while I was writing kids TV. And about 10 years ago, I just decided, you know what, you've toyed with this. I've done some like straight to paperback kind of smaller books, some IP books. I thought, maybe you can do this. And then I just took the plunge, and I love it. and I am now for 2 years now only an author, and professionally, it's the happiest 2 years I've had. I love doing it. So it was not an origin story so much as a very long evolution of the kid who wanted to be a writer but didn't think he could be an author, a whole generation later deciding maybe I should try it.
I love that. I love that. Of course, I totally relate because I didn't know any English coming to this country. So reading was something I loved, but was also really hard, and I gave up a lot of the times. I gave up a lot of books that were really hard and just couldn't get through them.
Well, I wondered from you. So I know you went to law school,
Mhm.
and so here you are. And I forget, but your undergrad wasn't English either, right? And what was your
Yeah, it
undergrad?
was political science.
Right. So where did that pivot come? I mean, I gotta say, the pivot from writing for Nickelodeon to writing kids' book is serious, but it's still in the same general neighborhood. That
Right.
seems like a U-turn.
Well, okay. So one thing about me, which people don't know necessarily, don't always know, is that I went to college at a ridiculously young age. I was
Right.
only 13 when I went to college. So I,
So,
you
so,
know,
so, so, so I can remember this. You didn't speak English at 5, but 8 years later you were at Berkeley, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so obviously we were on different education tracks. But go on, keep going.
Well, I don't know, but what that's to say that whatever I thought I was going to do at the age of like 14, 15 in college is not necessarily the definitive thing that I actually wanted. It was
Right.
just something that I
Makes
majored in. I
sense.
mean, honestly, a lot of that had to do with professors I really loved. Like I honestly really love I love politics, I
Right.
love
It's fascinating.
debating. Like, I follow a lot of stuff that's going on. I was a debate teacher for many, many years. I was also a writing teacher. So I don't know that they're totally different, but one of the
Right.
things that I always did with writing was I was always writing for the newspaper. So I wrote a lot when I was living in Hong Kong for the newspaper there. And I was also contributing to like the Times and whatnot. So even though I'm an author now, a lot of what inspires me in the kind of books that I write are like current events and what's going on
Well,
in the world, and
you.
it's just covering it from a different angle, a different
Exactly.
style of covering it.
And I think it's interesting that both of us moved to this country. So I came from a family that was Italian and American, so I was raised in a pretty normal American thing, but I still came here. I wasn't born here, and that doesn't seem significant unless it's your life, and all of a sudden people act different. It's like, wait, you're not from here, you're not, and I think probably there's an observer status that comes with that,
Mhm.
and that it lends itself to writing, certainly, and so writing was always the thing I wanted to do. I think from fifth grade on, but I just didn't know what I was going to write. So for
Right.
me, fifth grade to senior year of college was figuring out what I was writing, what it was going to be. I just knew it was going to be something. And I've done a little bit of everything from magazine, journalism, television, books, just anyone that would. I decided that rather than find a job to make money so I could write at night, which is what some of my friends did, I would do any job that paid me to write something, figuring that that experience would somehow help me.
Totally, totally. Well, let's talk a little bit about your newest book.
Okay. Yeah.
It's so cool. This is the fourth in the series, and I'm so
Right.
excited that there's going to be a fifth. Can you just tell everyone kind of like what's happening so far at this point?
Sure. So the idea of City Spies is 5 kids from around the world have all kind of fallen through the cracks in different cultures. All have been adopted by this British secret agent named Mother, this man named Mother. And the backstory, I don't want to get too far into the backstory, but to kind of explain what happened, Mother had been an agent and his wife was an agent, and so they were kind of like this agent team. And before the first book takes place, something happened, a mission gun went bad, and the wife disappeared and took their children with her. And so it's him searching for his own kids. And while searching for his kids, he's found other kids and he can't turn his back on them. And looking for one family, he's built another one. And so he has built this family of these 5 kids, raises them as spies because that's what he knows. And MI6 kind of inadvertently discovers that there are some times where kids can blend in where adults would stand out. So while it's absurd to say there's 12, 13-year-old secret agents, it kind of hopefully works in these plots. And so they each book kind of has a centerpiece destination. So the first one was Paris, the second one was San Francisco, the third one was Beijing, and now we're to the fourth one. And as we can tell by the cover, the fourth one is Egypt. We go both to Cairo, where the pyramids are, but the actual ultimate destination is down further south in the Valley of the Kings. And what I wanted to do, so part of the fun is coming up with the locations and really trying to immerse the plot in that location. And so I knew I wanted to go to Egypt. I thought there's just so much rich territory to mine, but it's so old, and I'm trying to be contemporary. And so what I have going on is actually, it is a cyber attack on London has shut down like some major institutions like the Underground and the hospitals and the British Museum, but it's all connected somehow to ancient Egypt and exploration there, and perhaps maybe what the British Museum has done in Egypt and some other things. And so what I got to do was write about something very modern, which is cyber assault, and something very ancient, which is ancient Egypt. And it was really fun to kind of mix those together. And so the plot is to figure out what's going on with the cyber attack. They have to go down, and they have to go on this adventure down into Egypt, into stuff that has been mysterious and captivating for centuries, thousands of years, millennia.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's just so amazing. Yeah, I started reading it, and I'm a huge fan of your books. I think I read the Frame series.
Okay.
And I really, really, really
Thank you.
admire, first of all, admire mystery writers. I think there's so much to keep track in your head. So how do you do it? I mean, just walk us through the process of, everything that you just said. It sounds like there's so many different timelines to just keep track of, so many characters and all their character arcs. How do you keep everything together in your head when you're writing?
I am lucky. There are 3 girls who live on my block that are brilliant, and they read everything I write. And actually, when I forget something, I just call them. They're 10, 13, and 14 years old, and they've read everything. They've read this book that comes out tomorrow. They read it months ago. Although
wow.
the youngest just read it this week. It was so funny. She came storming up to my door, literally stomping. And I'm like, "What's the matter, Leah?" And she goes, "How can you leave me with so many unanswered questions?" And that's when I realized that, the ending worked, because there's at the end, there's some here you go. So I try to chart it out. I'm not a plotter. I'm not an outliner. I outline usually the first third, because I need to know how it goes, and then I try to always add outlines as I get closer. So I think of it as if you're taking a family trip across the country, and I plan the first 4 days of the trip, and on the second day or third day, I'm looking at, okay, what are we doing? So I'm not just writing into the void, but I keeping track is sometimes hard. So I write note cards, which is something we did a lot of in television writing. Is you write all the scenes down on note cards so the staff can work on it together, and you tape them to the wall. So I do that sometimes. I almost always have a very clear idea of the ending. So I don't know everything that's going to happen. Again, back to that analogy, if I'm driving from New York to LA, I don't know much about what's happening between Chicago and Vegas, but I do know I'm ending up in Los Angeles. I'm going to Santa Monica Pier, and that's where the trip is. So you try to always keep moving in that direction. And I think because I never thought I was going to write books, I don't know that I write them the way smart people write them. So what I end up doing
I hear
is
what you're saying. I do. Everybody is so different.
Yeah, I keep going. So what I do a lot of is, every Monday, I'll go back and I'll read the last 100 pages to start the week, to remind myself of, oh yeah, you put that in, and I'll make little notes. Don't forget to do that. And I try to keep track of it that way. And then luckily I have a fantastic editor, and and she reminds me, it's well, you did this great setup here and you never paid this off. But I just try to keep it in. I do a ton of research. That for me, and one of my jobs after I did kids TV is I did a lot of documentaries for the History Channel and for I did travel shows for a couple of networks, and so I got in the habit of, especially writing about places, going and scouting the locations and researching. So for this, I wrote this during COVID, which meant I couldn't go to Beijing for the second book, and I couldn't go to Egypt for this book because I couldn't travel.
Mhm.
So I really relied on people who grew up there, people who taken vacations there, so I could see what it was like from a tourist. I tracked down Kara Cooney. Kara Cooney is like one of the leading Egyptologists in the world. She's at UCLA, which was hard for me because I went to a rival school and I didn't know if she'd want to help a USC grad. So I wrote that in the letter, please don't hold this against me. And she's a genius about these ancient Egyptian cultures. And so I talked to her about that, but I also everyone I talked to, I asked, you know, when I talk to an expert, another one I talk to a lot, or some is the former deputy director of the CIA. His wife's a librarian. She volunteered him to help me. And I always ask them, I go, what do you hate in movies and books about what you do for a living? What's the mistake that we make? Because we know everything about spying from James Bond, or we know everything about Egypt from watching The Mummy. And actually, that answer almost helps me more than anything else, because they will really get passionate about.
What was
Well,
the answer?
well, for spies, it was great. For spies, he said there's without hesitation. He said there's 3 things that are wrong in every spy movie. Oh no, 4, like that. He corrected himself. I'm like, okay, what are they? He goes, the first thing, in your spy books, you act like the agencies can do anything. Like there's this unlimited budget, and hey, we have to fly a team into so and so in 20 hours, and they're all there. He goes, that doesn't work. The second thing is people are always going rogue, and people don't really go rogue. The agencies are actually pretty good. And then he said, and you act like they're idiots, and they're not idiots because these are really smart people. But he said the worst thing in spy movies is that the spy movie is always about the operative. And he says every great advance in espionage history has been someone at a desk looking at information from many operatives. It's the reader, not the action hero. That's the actual hero. And I said, well, I can fix all of the other things except for that. Because you can't have 300 pages of a book of someone sitting at a desk reading what other people are doing. You need that, and so, but I do talk about that. I try to address that. And for Kara, when I asked her about, there's all this voodoo, and she goes, what's great about the Egyptian culture is how much science is there. And you want to talk about curses and things, and that's not it. And she goes, and it's so much more interesting when you talk about how things were really done. And an issue I talked to her about that I feel it's not an easy issue, but I feel it's an important issue, is the fact that, say, all these great treasures from Egypt are in the British Museum, and they don't really belong there, but it's easy to say that, and I understand why that museum doesn't want to give them up. So I thought, well, what do you think? It's easy for me. And she was really honest about how these things should be, and I found that to be a question that was great to give to the characters, because I think kids really connect, young readers really connect with fairness and what's right and wrong. And that's an issue of that. That's not really an issue of politics and are you conservative, are you liberal, or an issue. It's really is it right for this country to have the treasures of that country? I just, City Spies 5 takes place at the big climax takes place at the New York Public Library, and researched it and I went on a great tour there. But at the New York Public Library, they have the original Winnie the Pooh and all the characters that Christopher Robin Milne had that inspired the books. And you read about it, and in England, there's all these people who are upset that how dare we take their national treasure of these stuffed animals. They belong in England, not in New York. And I really would love the New York Public Library to say, send the Rosetta Stone back and then call us, right? It's like, you can't steal from one culture, and then when it's you're all outraged at it.
Right.
I'm not throwing the British under the bus. This is every museum in the world. I'm a museum freak. Virtually every museum in the world has stuff that when you think about it, it's like, does that really belong there? I don't know. So I don't give answers or I don't get preachy, but that's the thing they talk about, which is, I have so far wandered off your question. I apologize.
No, I love that. That's really wonderful. All right, so let's talk a little bit about character before we get into everybody's questions. I know that people have so many great questions, so I'm like dying to
Okay.
have you give their questions a chance. But you have such really interesting characters, and there are so many different facets about each and every one. How did you go about deciding, like, on how did you create these characters?
Well, so the idea for the book came, my son went to school in England for a year. So that was part of his college experience. His junior year was in England. And my wife and I went to visit him, and we spent a week in Paris and London, like 3 days in each and a day in the middle kind of thing. And I knew from that trip that I wanted to write about, it was the perfect time. I had finished the book literally the day before we flew, and I'm seeing all these great places. I'm like, there's so many great places. So I want to write a book where each, like, I wanted the covers are what I hoped. Like, it's the Eiffel Tower, and then it's the Golden Gate Bridge, and then it's the Great Wall, or whatever it is. And there's adventure. So I knew I wanted to be all over. So I wanted kids from all over. I didn't want it to be these American kids who went everywhere. And so I pretty quickly came up with the idea of how it should be, but I had this great fear. So I don't know how many people watching are kids or adults. The kids won't remember this, but there was a movie way back called The Dead Poets Society. And I went to see The Dead Poets Society with my mother. And all the kids in the book are the same age. It's set in the 1950s. They all had short brown hair with the same haircut, and they all wore a school uniform, and none of them were famous actors. And halfway through the movie, my mom turned to me and she said, "I don't know which one is which, so I can't follow the story." And that really struck me, that it's important that we keep track, we make characters when on the creation side, that a reader or a viewer or whomever can keep track of with some fairness. And I'm throwing 5 kids in, and I knew I wanted 5. And so I came up with this idea that their code names would be the cities they were from. And because the code names were the cities they were from, they would, I could pick kids from all over. So the first thing was coming up with, well, you don't want, like, where you are, you don't want Calabasas or Chatsworth or, to be a code, right? You want names that sound kind of like people names. So I spent a couple of days coming up with cities that are also people names. I got like 100 of them, and I thought 1 per continent is the rule. And so I picked those. So I ended up with Brooklyn is the American, Sydney is the girl from Australia, Rio is from Brazil, Paris from France, and then I added there weren't as many Asian cities, and I fell in love with the idea of a girl named Kat from Kathmandu. So those were my 5. So in the weird way, I had the names of the characters before I had the characters, which is the opposite, and I had the hometowns. So I started coming up with it, but this way I knew when people read it, they would know, oh, Paris, he's the one from France. I can keep track of that. Oh, Brooklyn is the one from America. So I started thinking, let's avoid the cliches and the stereotypes of different areas, but let's really think about how Sydney, Australia is different than Kathmandu. And maybe, so this is ocean-based, and this is mountain-based. So, and I don't, so there's surfing, and it's athletic, and there's a lot in Sydney, but I don't want it to be a boy, so we're going to make that a girl who is very athletic. So that's a trait of hers. And I started kind of just building the characters from that. And then I kind of had an idea of them, and I went back to my middle school experience, and I took one of my problem anxiety issues of mine and gave one of them to each of them. So each of them are a different part of the troubled part of what it felt like for me to be in middle school. So my sense of feeling I didn't have friends, or didn't know how to keep friends, or didn't know social situations, I'll give that to Kat. And my feeling of, God, I just don't want to disappoint anyone or let anyone down, I'm going to give that one to Paris. And this feeling of like, oh, I'm the youngest in my family, so everyone overlooks me, I'm going to give that one. And so I gave that, and it was that combination that kind of then gave me the ingredients to start cooking. And it's really fun. And a decision we made very early on that I am so happy with is each book features a different kid as the main character. So it's
Right.
not like Brooklyn's story and they're the supporting characters. No, book one is about Brooklyn. That's the one where she joins. It makes sense. And book two, and and then what I do is I don't have one now because I just finished that book, but I put a post-it up, and on the post-it I write each kid's problem for the book that they're most working on, and I tape that to my computer, and I remind myself, okay, this is what is bothering Sydney, not to hit one note over and over, but to try to remember that we have to address this every time she has something important going on.
Yeah. It's hard though. I mean, it's hard. It's like it's hard when, I know as someone who I have like ensemble casts when I write as well. And it's just tough to keep track of all these people over so many years.
And so how many books are there in front discs? Is 3 or 4?
The fourth book came out
Key
last,
player is 4, right?
yeah, Key Players
Okay,
number
okay.
4. I
So
only have 3 kids, although we're probably going to introduce more kids. But anyways, it's 3 kids, Mia, Lupe, and Jason, and they're really, really memorable kids. So they have they're big personality type kids.
does
But
that help you
even
keep
then,
track? Does
I
that help
mean,
you?
you kind of like want in each book at least for all of them to kind of like go on to new territory emotionally. Do you know what I mean? And so
Right.
you can't really rehash any of the same problems,
Right.
at least for me. And it's hard because as a kid, you've covered so much territory already by book 4 that you're kind of like, well, what is there emotionally to cover? I mean, they're not really in high school yet. So do you ever run into that problem?
Yeah, it's very tricky, and I think you do an amazing job of it in your books. And and one of the things that I do a lot is I do try to see what other authors who I love are doing, see how they deal with these problems. Because like I said, I didn't train or plan this. So this is not like, oh, for 30 years I've been waiting for the chance to write these books and I have all these ideas. It's like, oh, a lot of times I'll ask myself, well, what's the movie equivalent? Because I know movies so well from my education. And it's like in a movie, you would cut from here to there. It's like, well, what's the book equivalent? So sometimes I'll read other people's. But yeah, keeping the characters constantly growing, constantly experiencing new things. Because what's amazing, and I'm sure you've seen this in yours, is I assumed, like, this is the first book, Brooklyn's the main character, and Brooklyn's the American. So I thought when I would go around to schools and I ask, who's your favorite character? You're trying to loosen them up. I'll get 50% Brooklyn, and the other 4 kids will be spread out over the other 50%. And from the beginning, it's been 20%, 20%, 20%. It has been down the. That means if you favor one in a book, but you don't really address, say, two of the 5, 40% of your audience, of your readership, feels like, oh, I waited a whole year for this.
Mm.
And Rio's still just doing the same thing he did in the last book.
Mhm.
So it's hard to keep moving that. But I also think sometimes that pushes it, and it's nice to be able to do different things. One of the things that I really learned in television is I worked with kids, and you really try to be protective of kids when you're on the writing side, and it really parents of kids are sometimes hard to deal with. And when the kids their characters didn't get enough good scenes, the parents were on you.
So funny.
And I understood that, and I just took it, but I also reminded myself, okay, but is there truth to that? Have we, because we're in the writer's room and we're rushing, have we let this character be one note for too long? And that was good training for me, because I don't have like fake conversations in my head, but I do think of the characters almost like they're going to come to me complaining. It's like, James, what's up? How come you haven't? So what I'm interested in you is, obviously there are such important autobiographical parts of you in these books.
Mhm.
Does that make it hard to mix that with the characters maybe who you're creating out of whole cloth?
Hmm. I mean, at this point, I don't think that it's hard anymore, because I think that, you know, when I've had to get off of the whole, like, what really happened to me.
Right, you have to.
Kind of have to. But things that actually happen to me still provide a great, like, jumping point. You know, they're a great seed to explore an emotion. And so for me, it's just about thinking back in terms of what were the big emotions at the time, right? What haven't I explored yet? So, you know, I've explored a lot in terms of Mia and all of her issues, right? And so much of it is like finding that confidence and finding that voice and getting over the insecurities and dealing with, you know, a boy who likes you, you don't necessarily like him back, dealing with this, dealing with that. There's a lot of things that she's already gone through, but there's still a lot that she still has to, unfortunately, go through in
Right,
life.
but we do, you know, and I think of these books as maps. It's
Mhm.
like we made it out of middle school
Yeah.
somehow. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave these coded messages for you. Because if we leave it straightforward, you'll ignore it, and also adults will try to swipe it out of your way. But if we leave these coded messages, you know, so I think, like, I do these plots that, yes, there's a lot of unrealism in the idea that MI6 is sending a 13-year-old to do this thing. So I'm asking you to give me that. What I owe in return to you is the emotional growth and the dynamics of the people have to be 100% authentic to stuff that happens in everyday life, that happens to you as a 12-year-old, as a 13-year-old, that I remember, and that anxiety that I remember so much at the time of, like, I can't figure anything out, you know, and I'm never going to get through this. So hopefully the books are kind of like these little, like, things, that breadcrumbs we leave to figure out, you know. And Kathy's here, which makes me think we have to move to questions, because I have one more question I need to ask Kelly, if that's all right. So
Sure.
Kelly, what I'm wondering from you, because I have, next year I'll have 2 books a year coming out, City Spies book, and then also a new series called Sherlock Society. So when you switch from these characters who are so embedded to write, say, Finally Seen,
Mhm.
how do you switch gears? Because it's not just the
Mm-hmm.
plots and the characters, but it's the voice. Like, it's
Mm.
the voice of your writing has to change.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. And every time I'm working on one thing, I'm always like, dang it, if I just, like, started working on the next front desk book, I'll be so happy.
Yeah, exactly, right?
And then when I'm on front desk, I'm like, oh, I wonder if there's another standalone that I have to explore this issue. But you know, I have to really, that's why, like, for me, I really have to love the project.
Right. Absolutely.
Otherwise it's too hard, you know, it has to be something that you absolutely need to tell, that there's no one else who can tell it as well as you. And you feel compelled to tell the story, and there is a point, and that point is new to the world. It's not something that's already been told by someone else, maybe
Right.
better, because otherwise it's too easy for you to just go like, oh, it's too hard. It's really, really hard. Like, I'm working on this one book right now,
Right.
which I've had to rewrite like 5 times.
Oh.
It's been kicking my butt. It's been so hard. In my ridiculous, I don't know, stress-induced
Yep.
mania, I actually got a puppy yesterday, like, as though that's gonna solve my problem.
It doesn't. Mine doesn't. Mine's right there. Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Oh,
so cute. Mine is, like, literally chewing up every cord downstairs.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
Not good. But it's got to be something where, and so at the end of the day, what makes you keep going is you're going, well, but kids really need this book. They really need it for XYZ reason. It just isn't something that is available right now. No one's able to tell them about it and talk to them about it in a way that they can digest and is fun. And I need it to exist. And usually for me, it's like my own kids, they really need XYZ book to exist in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it is hard, and you have to, like, switch gears. So one thing I've realized is I cannot work on 2 books at the exact same time.
I don't think I could do that.
Yeah. I can't even think about another book, so I'm really late on proposal, and I'm like, I can't think about it, guys. Can't think about it until I'm totally done. So you really have to devote your whole brain space to the book that you're currently on to do it justice. And to,
Or I would lose track of those things we talked about. How do you keep track of all this stuff? There is
yeah.
this like extended universe in my head of this guy's doing this and this is important there. But what I have the biggest trouble is shifting voice. I can shift plot, but like I did that when I wrote the first Frame book after having written the Dead City books. I wrote the first like 50 pages, and my wife said something that was so true, but was like the most devastating thing she's ever said to me. She's like, "Oh, I think it's great, but it just sounds like you took Molly and made her a boy." Molly was the main character in the last series. I'm like, "Oh, oh, you're right, you're right."
Oh,
And I don't think I wrote a word for 4 months to try to
oh,
change gear of cleansing the palate of my brain and getting a different voice. And now I'm better at it because I've had to do it a few times. But yeah, I'm impressed by. I may separately write to you at times and ask for help, or
yeah, yeah.
I got Girl Scout cookies now, and we can just like you know help each other through the
Yeah.
anxiety. Yeah.
The worst one was when I had to do Parachutes and Three Keys together, because those two were on like a same publication track, same publication time, and so they needed revisions all at the same time.
Oh
And
wow.
so, and you like could not be more different. You
No,
know?
they
No,
couldn't.
no.
Could not be more
Different
different.
age groups, different
Right.
everything.
And I
That's
just remember going,
self-inflicted
oh my
though.
God, this is so hard.
That's somewhat self-inflicted.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but at least now I'm sort of like mostly middle grade, thank God.
Okay, there you go. Good. We
Um,
need you here on our team all the time. So that's good.
We absolutely do, but I would add that the YA, it is very YA, but the YA of Parachute is a stunning gut punch.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
You are very welcome. Okay, I have like 15 minutes left in this event, and I have 9 bajillion questions.
Okay.
So we're gonna kind of try to go a little rapid fire. Before we do that, one of the
That was
beautiful
directed at me, by the way, Kelly.
it was
I answer too long. I get it, Kathy.
one of the beautiful things about being virtual is that we have people from around the country here, and we can make all these connections. So I just have to say hello to my sister in Chicago who is watching.
Hey, Kathy's sister.
So yay, thank you. Okay, here we go. Here's a question from Aiden for both of you.
Okay.
You're talking about that you have new books coming out, James, with Sherlock Society, and Kelly, you know you have a new proposal due. How do you come up with those ideas?
Ooh. James, why don't you go?
So books for me always start with questions. You know, I like to think of a book idea. The big concept is a room. There's a lot of ways to get in the room. You go through the door, go through the window, go through the ceiling, whatever.
Okay.
You just have to get in the room. Once you get in the room, you can look around. And for me, it's questions. So I'll know a genre I want to do. I want to do like I knew. Okay, I'll walk you through how I came up with Sherlock Society. I wanted to do a mystery. I wanted to do a mystery, probably set in Florida, because I grew up in Florida and I have not written Florida yet. And so there's some stuff from my childhood that is unique to living at the ocean and marine biology and environmental and all like that. I take my lovely dog Lucy for a walk, and we go to the lake, and I stop at every bench. And every bench there's a question, and I can't leave the bench till I answer the question. So first bench, okay, what do I want to write about? And I sit there, Lucy's happy, she's outside, breeze off the lake. I go, mystery, but who's solving it? And I go, family. And I knew I wanted multi-generation. Okay, so then I walk. And then the next bench, I sit down. Okay, multi-generation, grandfather. Oh, okay, how's a grandfather? Because multi-generation in Miami seems right.
I'm remembering this now.
You know, and eventually it came around after I sat on 6 benches. It was, Grandpa used to be an investigative reporter for the Miami Herald. He lives with the kids. They're bored during the summer, and he has this file cabinet filled with all the cases he couldn't figure out when he was a reporter. So they start digging into all these cold cases from 30 years ago and trying to figure them out. And when I had that much, I told Lucy, okay, we're heading home. So now we can go home. So now I can let life interfere, and I can let computer and get back to the book. And I let that percolate for a couple days, say. And then you just kind of keep asking questions. Well, if that happens, then what? And, well, how do they get around? Like, there's a rule I learned at Nickelodeon. It is the greatest secret of my writing life, which was when I was at Nickelodeon, the rule was every show had to have one character who was 16. And the rule was if anyone ever asked, how do they get there? You would say, oh, Noah drove. Noah's 16. He can drive. We just didn't show that scene. Because getting kids around is one of the hardest things in these books. I don't know if you've had that problem, Kelly, but you have to physically get them from place to place to place. So up until now, all my books are set where there's great mass transit. DC, New York, because then I could say, oh, they took the subway. Oh, they took the metro. With City Spies, it's like, oh, MI6 provides the transportation. But I'm in Florida. There's no good mass transportation, and so I thought, Grandpa, that's what led me to Grandpa. And I have Grandpa driving around in an old Cadillac named after Dionne Warwick, or I'm sorry, Roberta Flack. And then I knew I had an idea. All right, that's not the short rapid fire answer you're looking for, but I was being nice to Kelly and giving her time to come up with her answer. So Kelly,
Oh, yeah, okay. I was hoping that maybe I wouldn't have to answer. But anyway, for me, it usually starts with what am I obsessively thinking about? Like, what is hogging up all of my attention and all of my energy? And there's usually some big thing that I'm thinking about, either as a parent or as, a person looking back on my life at that point in my life, or as an author. And Finally Seen is my newest book, comes out in a few weeks. And it does touch on the fact that, a lot of times immigrant families don't come to this country all at the same time. Mom and dad might come first and the kids are still back home with grandparents, or maybe only mom is here with one kid and then dad's still working at home, whatever. So Lena has not been with her family for 5 years. She's been left behind in China. She is what they call a left behind child. That's actually really common in China. I've personally met a whole bunch of them. I know people who had this happen to them. This is very, very common for a lot of immigrant families. It's not really something that a lot of people talk about or know about.
No.
Yeah. So she's been waiting by the phone for 5 years for her family, for her parents and her little sister, who they did take, to call her and say, okay, it's time for you to come over. And they were supposed to just get things settled, but like 1 month turns into a year, turns into 5 years. And finally she gets the call, and that's when the whole book starts. But she's also angry, like she's bringing over a whole set of emotions,
Right.
Very different from like Mia Tang, for instance. And she's got a lot of questions, like why didn't you call me? Why did you pick Millie, my little sister, to bring here? Like, why didn't you pick me? Things like that. And she also doesn't think that anyone can possibly understand what she's had to go through for these last 5 years. And that's something that, she does have in common with Mia Tang, which is that like they have this whole life that they keep a secret from their friends. But then she picks up a book and she feels for the first time finally seen. Unfortunately, that book does get challenged in her class. So then it dives right back into something I've been going through as an author, which is, book banning. And I'm always someone who just like, even when I was a teacher, I taught kids from, 8 to 12 how to write. And I would always use what's going on in the world. Like, I really believe that kids are super aware of everything that's going on in the world, and they need us to talk about it with them in order to make sense of it, to really unpack it and process it and understand it. So yeah, Finally Seen is about that core emotion of what it means to never feel seen and then finally feel seen for the first time, only to have it taken away.
Right.
And that's something that, is gutting if you're an immigrant. It's like, what? We've already lived through so many years of not having that. And then to say certain books are inappropriate or whatever really makes it hard to ever feel like you have much of a chance. And I don't want kids to feel like that. I want them to choose the future where they are finally seen.
That is wonderful. I will also just chime in because we do live in an area of the country where there are often challenges. And if there are adults on this call, speak up, vote, go to your school board meeting, speak kindly and respectfully, but make it known that you believe that children should have access to read whatever they want, and that librarians are professional, degreed teachers who can make those choices.
You
That's
know,
what needs to happen.
the analogy that always works for me is like, people would be horrified if we said, you know what, I should be able to call the plays for the football team, even though I'm in the stands and I have nothing. It's like, no, there's a coach they hired that's trained to be the football coach, and we all understand that. Librarians, the same thing. It's like, this, yeah. And I live in a part of the country right now where librarians are certainly under siege.
Yeah, I
And
mean, and as someone who has a library degree, I had to do a lot of work to get that degree
yeah.
about how to develop a collection and how to represent your entire community. But anyway, let's move
Anyway,
on.
okay.
Here's a question from someone y'all might know. Her name is Jen Calanita, and she would like to know,
Jen.
you both write series and we love them. What is the hardest part about continuing stories in a series?
You go first this time.
Okay, my hardest part is this going to live up to the rest of the books? And you always want to end a series on a high note. So you don't want to end it because, you dropped the ball in the last book and nobody bought it.
Right.
So there's this pressure, right? And it's not even like something that is articulated to you, but you just feel this pressure like, okay, the last book was great. And you put everything you have into every single book. So of course, every book feels like, yeah, I gave it my all and it's so good and I love it. And if we just ended it here, I'd be happy, And so when you start the next one, you're scared a little bit. You're like, am I going to do the fans right with this book? Am I going to, give it everything and more and make it even better than the last one? So I think there's this internal pressure and it makes it really hard sometimes. But then you kind of have to like relax and just kind of almost psych yourself into it and just be like, well, but I love the characters. I want to know what happens to them next, and really make yourself like a fan first before you are a creator. Just remember that, they're out in the world for a reason. People need them.
That pressure is very real. My hope and expectation, maybe because I came to writing books a little bit later, is that each book should be better, not even just live up. That doesn't mean more action or whatever, but they should be better. And now we have many books worth of development, so these characters are rich now. So that pressure is a very real concern. But to me, the hardest part is the first third of the next book, in which you have to accept the fact that some people haven't read the other books that are reading this book.
Yeah.
So you have to explain everything to them in a way that makes sense. But you realize probably 80% of the people have read it. So you don't want to bore them. So to use the movie equivalent, it can't be, oh, James Bond, what do you do? Well, I work for MI6 and I'm 007 and 00 means I can, you don't want it, you can't do that.
Right.
But especially with young readers, and especially even if they have read it, they haven't read it in a year maybe, if they're really loyal fans and they read them when they come out. And so figuring out ways to slip that in is hard, and is the trick. But when you do it, you feel really good about it. It's like, oh, okay, that actually feels organic, because you don't want to have this, info dump where it's like, always the best way. This was the trick of television writing. Is every TV show about a school, every movie about a school involves someone new, right? Someone new arriving at the school. And that way, someone can give them the tour of the school and say, oh, well, over here, these are the jocks and these are the cheerleaders and they're really smart and that's the nice teacher and everyone goes here, because they're really talking to the audience, not the character, right? So you got to find little ways for someone new to ask some questions sometimes. But that for me is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Those are both excellent. I really appreciate that. There are a number of people who have asked, including Canna, Ben, and I'm going to try to do your name right. Eofi? I'm sorry, it's Irish and I am an Italian Norwegian. So I appreciate all the questions you guys sent in.
Which meatballs do you like better, the Scandinavian or the Italian? Come on, answer that right.
Italian, unless I'm at IKEA. But they all are asking, like, what is your favorite book? What is your favorite this? Instead, I'm going to kind of twist it. Tell me a scene from one of your books that you really loved writing. Okay.
First of all, I saw Canna on that. Hello, Canna. Canna has been writing me great letters of support and for years. So
Oh,
Canna is a true diehard fan.
oh, I'm sorry. It's Aoife.
Aoife,
It's
okay, there
pronounced
we go.
Aoife. Thank you so much for letting me know. Aoife is one of the people who asked about
Okay.
favorites too.
You know, and I noticed too, she said, what's your favorite character? I do want to answer that as part of yours. You cannot have a favorite character. If you have a favorite character, it tilts the balance of what you're writing, and you favor that character, and life doesn't work that way. So you have to keep from having a favorite character, is my belief. Favorite scene, I was telling this, actually, I was told this the other day, and I was in a panel, and I cried when I told the story. I don't know why. There was a moment when I was a kid, I was 11 years old. Star Wars was a very big deal. That's when Star Wars came out. And we went and all through the movie, I thought I wanted to be Luke Skywalker, right? Luke's the hero. And then Han's the hero, right? I mean, Luke is kind of, but Han's the unexpected hero. Han's the hero that sweeps in when you think all is done and you really thought he'd left for good. That's my favorite stuff to write. That's that point when not only audience, but when the character discovers that they're a hero is such a great moment when they find something. And if you're being true and organic to it, you know, I can't say it because it's in book 5 but I wrote a scene like 2 weeks ago that I cried and I don't cry. I cried because I was so happy because the character who always wanted to be a hero became one in a very unusual way. And it felt organic, and all the ways he thought he needed to be weren't it. So, but my favorite anything goes back to the first book I wrote. The last page of Dead City will be hard for me to ever top from the reaction that I got from readers. There's just basically it's a 300-page build to a reveal, not on the level of The Sixth Sense, but like The Sixth Sense, where it's like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't wait, and you want to go and reread stuff. And I loved writing that moment, and I would get letters from mothers saying, well, last night at 3 a.m. I heard a loud noise in my daughter's room. I was worried. And it's because I went in there and I said, what's the matter? And it's because she threw your book across the room. I thought she'd been asleep for hours, and she couldn't believe the ending. And
That's the best.
I'm like, I'm not sorry about that. I mean, it's, you know, and that kind of goes back to the series thing. One of the things that's also hard to do is making a book a full, total thing that answers the questions, but still leaving stuff that you want to know. So the cliffhanger that's not a cliffhanger, but is a cliffhanger. So when I can write those, I love that. What about you, Kelly?
Oh, my favorite scene that I've written so far is something that is coming out in September. And I can't talk about it, but
you have another book coming out in September?
Yeah, I have a book coming out in September.
And one coming out this month?
We haven't announced it yet because we just haven't had time, and I don't know, everybody got busy, so we haven't announced it yet.
Hang on, I'm Googling something. You keep talking. You just keep talking.
But there's a scene in there that I have been building towards for 6 years, and it is so dramatic, and it takes place on the Golden Gate Bridge. So when you guys read it, you'll know what I'm talking about because it's so emotional. I think everybody's gonna be so happy. It's a scene that we've been working towards.
There's a scene in this that that comes out tomorrow that I've been working toward for about 3 years. When I was driving across North Carolina, going from independent bookstore to independent bookstore, that's our vacation. We went to 14 bookstores in North Carolina. I told my wife, I said, this is what I'm going to do in the next City Spies book. And she screamed. And I thought, okay, that's the reaction I wanted. And I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm not going to hint at anyone. I'm going to let I did tell my editor because I wanted to make sure she was okay because it's like.
It's something.
Yeah. And that was fun too. So you guys will read that. And awesome. I'm not going to say anything else. In the middle of the next one. And from the advance, I've gotten some emails from people who've done advanced reviews and stuff. And they go, I can't believe you did this. So this is why she came up the other day stomping with I have so many unanswered, there's so many unanswered questions. So yeah.
That is awesome. And there are so many questions left, but we don't have time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send them to you, James and Kelly. And if you happen to have time and can answer some of them on Instagram stories or on Twitter or something,
Sure.
that would be great.
That would be great.
I do wrap with one final question. At Blue Willow, we talk about books of our heart. Can you tell me a book, either from when you were a child or something you shared with your children or something you've read as an adult, that you would consider a book of your heart?
Oh, for sure. It's going to be Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good. It's just,
I mean, and that was, yeah.
it was a book that changed me as a reader, because I had previously been reading only series like Babysitter's Club, Goosebumps. Those are the books that I would devour, but because they were stuff that I could understand, it was easy to read, and it was a page turner. And this was the first like really serious book that was also a page turner.
Right.
And I didn't know you could do that. So it really changed everything for me.
Oh, I
For
love
me,
that.
you know, I've talked about a lot. When you're a poor reader like I was, you don't have a lot of books in your bag. But specifically because I was such a struggling reader, from the mixed up files of Mrs. Baisley Frank Weiler touched my heart in a way that I made it through, and I don't know how. It was so great. It is not a surprise that the first book series I did was about a precocious girl in New York, or that the second book series I did was about a boy whose parents worked at museums. It was so profoundly affecting and inspiring to me. And the great joke of it is, I can't believe this, is when I wrote Dead City, I decided to look up E.L. Konigsberg and send her a copy and thank her for inspiring me. So I wanted to find out where she lived. And I grew up in a beach town in Florida, like 10,000 people. In our area, there's like maybe 30,000 people. She was one. That whole time I was growing up, she lived in my hometown.
What?
She was just one of the women that you would see at the Publix grocery store. I had no idea. I assumed she lived this amazing Dorothy Parker life in New York with, you know, I mean, she's got 3 Newbery honors and medals
Yeah.
and this, and it's like she lives in Atlantic Beach. Like I
She went to
thought
your grocery store.
this has to be a joke. How did I not know that?
Oh,
It was so important to find out, because I have made it my mission to remind kids when I talk to them that writers come from everywhere. Because I think part of my fear thinking was, well, she has to be from New York. She wrote a book about New York. That's where writers live. You know, I live in Orlando, Florida. And when I talk in schools here, I point out, I go, hey, did you know Kate DiCamillo and John Green and Victoria Jamerson all grew up around here?
yes, they did.
These are the books that you love, and they're not written by some fancy pants person far away. They're written by some kid who sat in literally the same public school libraries that you sit in. Anyone could go to do this if it's what's in your heart.
Absolutely.
And if I had known that E.O. Konigsberg was in my hometown when I was growing up, I think that would have had an impact on me. So I do try to share that.
That is amazing, and such a wonderful note to end on.
And well, there's actually one note I do have to end on that I have to add there, and that is, Blue Willow has been amazing to me my whole 10 years. I love them so much. Independent bookstores do such an incredible job of connecting you to writers like this. You know, no one would have heard of my books, and you know, Kelly's books are so amazing, you probably would have heard of them anyway. But no one would have heard of my books if they weren't hand sold by independent booksellers or by lovely librarians and media specialists who said, I know you don't like to read, but maybe you'll like this one. So thank you, Kathy, for having us. And Kelly, thank you so much for making the time. You've got like 72 books coming out. You're super busy. So I really appreciate you taking this time to share with me.
Oh, I'm so honored to be on this too, because, you know, you're one of my favorite authors. And thank you so much for, you know, inviting me to be part of this conversation. And thank you, Blue Willow. I'm such a huge fan. I can't wait to actually go to your store.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen, Kelly.
Have her sign the wall near me.
I will absolutely make that happen. And remember, if you buy the book from us, you can get this really cool pen. I was playing with it like under the computer the whole time.
There you go. It's fun. They're fun.
Y'all, thank you for joining us. Have a great night, and we will look forward to seeing you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.